All right, good morning, everybody. Actually, in the past, Lydia, I think that we had people spread out against the lawn because of the pandemic, but you all can come up here now. Sorry. Oh, please come on up.
We'll stand together, we'll stand
Yeah,
closely
well, you
together.
can stand behind me, but stand close. What are you, come close? You guys come close. Okay. So thank you all very much for coming here this morning. We've got a number of guests as we talk about Victims of Communism Remembrance Month. We've got Lydia Brosh, who is a former state senator, and whose folks were from the Ukraine. Then we got Elena Newman, who has lived in a number of different places, including Russia, right? And then Jinghao Wang, who is from China. And before we get to the signing of the proclamation, I want to talk a little bit about why we're here. Starting with, what is communism? Communism was derived from Karl Marx's theories, and it's about class warfare. And it pits people against each other. And ultimately, the goal is that everything is owned publicly and that people are paid according to their needs and abilities. And that is obviously the opposite of what we do here in the United States. And communism has had so many terrible effects on people throughout the years. In fact, over 100 million people have died because of the implementation of communism. Because when you take that theory and then put it into practice, it has so many severe consequences. So we can see, for example, when Joseph Stalin forced his collectivization, 6 to 10 million people died there. Or Mao Zedong in his Great Leap Forward, an estimated 45 million people died. And to this day, people continue to suffer under communist and socialist regimes. Now, next month, the Chinese Communist Party is going to observe their 100th anniversary. And I'm sure President Xi Jinping is going to be handing out medals to people who have helped promote communism in his country. And it's important that we remember the suffering of the people have because of the Chinese Communist Party. Whether we're talking about the Uyghurs and the persecution of Turkic minority people there, or the religious repression of Christians in their underground churches, or the other ethnic or religious minorities that are persecuted in China. So we want to balance out what the Chinese Communist Party is going to be saying and remember the people who are suffering under that regime. It's also an excellent opportunity for us to remember the great gifts we have here in our nation. That our nation has a constitution that protects our religious freedom, that protects our freedom of speech and our freedom to assemble peaceably. In fact, in our Nebraska state constitution, it says that people are by nature and independent and free, that they have inherently inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our laws protect our rights. And that is one of the things that we need to remember here in the United States as we see what's going on overseas. And remember that people in the past have suffered under communism and continue to suffer under communism and repressive socialist regimes. And that's why we're here today, to remember the people's stories, the people who have suffered, the people who can share their stories about that repression under communism. So that's why we have our guests with us here today. We also have two state senators, Senator Rita Sanders and Senator Joni Albright. Thank you very much both for joining us. I know we've got some legislative staff here as well. We appreciate the senators joining us here today. So before I sign the proclamation, what I'd like to do is go ahead and turn it over to our guests to speak, and then I'll come back, sign the proclamation. We're going to take a quick photo opportunity, and then if any of the media want to catch people afterwards, they can do that. So with that, Lydia, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, and good morning. My parents were immigrants from the Ukraine. A church sponsored them, and I'm a first-generation American. I grew up with the stories of the fear, the horror, and the terror that they experienced during their lifetime in the Ukraine. I was always reminded that it was a privilege and a blessing to be born in America and for them to become American citizens. A day didn't go by where I was reminded that they had to pray with a secret Bible and a candle in a closet, no freedom of religion. They also were not given an education, but my mother's brother was, and as brilliant as she was, he was as well. But in Kiev, they found a shortwave radio in his dorm room. He was a professor. They didn't arrest him, she said, they just shot him. There is no freedom of speech, freedom of press, there is no freedom. So when they came to America for the American dream, it was a glimpse of heaven, and she always reminded us, this is a glimpse of heaven. They worked very hard, blue-collar, labor jobs, no education. When I was able to earn my college degree, it was beyond their belief that someone could come, go to school, work. They passed away before I was elected a state senator, but I know I'm paying forward. Every day I pay forward to this great country, and please, please realize that communism takes everything from you, not just your belongings, your property, your wealth, but it takes your ability to express yourself. It takes your ability to grow, and God bless America. I'm grateful and privileged and honored to be here. Thank you. Elena will follow me.
Good morning. My name is Elena Newman. I am a first-generation immigrant refugee who fled a territorial dispute that turned into a religious persecution. I came here with my family in November of 1993 to find a better life. I want to first and foremost extend gratitude to the governor's office for reaching out to me to speak today. Today is important as we once again are hopefully reminded and appreciate what we have here in the United States, the land of the free and the brave. I don't expect many to empathize with me, but I want to take you on a mental journey. Imagine for a moment waking up every day at 4 a.m. to stand in line, cold or heat, for a loaf of bread to ensure that there would be breakfast on the table for your family. Living your life in hiding your background, ethnicity, religion, limited water use to a few hours a day, and for 30 minutes, it would come out red to orange, flushing the rust from the pipes. Not being able to shower for days at a time. Electricity being shut off in the coldest months of winter. Your life prescribed to you from the moment you were born. Few choices, few options. Living in dilapidated housing establishments that should not have been inhabited, as they were structurally unsafe and infested by a variety of wildlife. Unfortunately, I didn't have to imagine these things. I lived these things. And that would have been my legacy and my life if my family would have stayed. We were refugees. We were forced out of our home and were given a choice to stay and die or leave and live. The government stood on the side and watched it happen. Our existence was for the betterment of those who bought their positions, and everything we had could be taken away from us at any time. The government did not care about us. I lived the nightmare that is the public healthcare system. I am fortunate enough that my aunt was a doctor, and as a doctor and head of the hospital department, she made $300 a month. I made more than that as a 16-year-old working at a grocery store. My mom, dad, brother, and I lived in one-room hotel about the size of this room, maybe a little smaller, where we ate, bathed, did homework, slept, and went to the bathroom. We had nothing when we came here, just $100 to be used by the 6 of us, sent to us by a sponsor family member. My education journey would have been decided for me. How I was supposed to act as a woman, what I wore, how much schooling I had, how far I went in education, what jobs I was eligible for, and who I married would have been determined by someone other than me. The streets are lined with gold, was what people would tell me when describing America. It took my family, 4 of us, plus my dad's parents, years to be approved to come to the US. We had to go through multiple interviews, background checks, and a complete health check. We had Medicaid for 6 months to get us started. After that, my dad worked 3 jobs and my mom worked 1 job. Our first address was 923 South 10th Street. They finally replaced the blue awning. I was happy to see that. It was a mansion compared to what I was used to. Our phone number was 438-4454. We moved to 10th and Washington soon thereafter. 11 months after we got here, my father died in a car accident. My mom was on her own for the first time caring for her children and her 2 in-laws. Soon after, my mom bought her first house, and the thing that sold her was the wood floors. As kids, we did what kids did. My brother and I went to Everett Elementary and eventually to Lincoln Christian School, where I graduated as a salutatorian of my class. I then went to UNL, University of Phoenix, and North Central University, majoring in psychology and minoring in English and sociology. I just recently conferred my doctorate degree. I am the first in my family to do so. Nothing in my life was given to me. I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor. I'm a proud citizen of the United States and will continue to do what I can to defend the rights, freedoms, and opportunities for myself and future generations that I otherwise would have never had. I'm thankful that my family was accepted into this country, and I want to thank Governor Ricketts for signing this proclamation to recognize the struggles that my family and others went through to start over. Thank you. Now I'll give it over to Jing Zhao.
Mr. Governor and distinguished guests, thank you for this opportunity to tell my family story. My name is Zhanghao Wang. I'm currently a PhD student at UNL. I was born and grew up in China. I was 7 years old when my mom started to practice Falun Gong, a Buddhist-based meditation practice whose core principles are truthfulness, compassion, tolerance. I still remember those wonderful days as my mom gained significant health benefits from the practice and became a kinder and more energetic person. However, when the number of the Falun Gong practitioners exceeded 70 million, which outnumbered the Chinese Communist Party membership, the CCP launched a brutal campaign to eradicate Falun Gong. In July 1999, fearing that its popularity and independence is a threat to the CCP's power, suddenly everything changed. I clearly remember at that time the CCP broadcast propaganda demonizing Falun Gong 24/7 on all media. The atmosphere was terrifying. My mom was arrested when she appealed to the provincial government. It was the first time I experienced deep fear and helplessness, and I was only 11 years old. Almost every week, we learned about how some people we know were persecuted. My middle school physics teacher was sent to the brainwashing camp twice and was tortured each time. A neighbor of us was jailed in a labor camp and forced to do slave labor, even though she was in her 70s. A library staff in our community died after being tortured in a brainwashing center. Fear wasn't the only heart-wrenching emotion I felt. The dehumanizing propaganda instills hatred towards Falun Gong into many Chinese people's minds, who thus view Falun Gong as the enemy of the state. Imagine how hard for kids like me to grow up being seen that way. I came to the States in 2016 for my graduate study, but my mom has been under close surveillance by local police since 2018. And she was arrested again in December 2020 for sharing information about Falun Gong. Due to medical reasons, she was released eventually, but the police confiscated her laptop and continued to harass her. My family is still lucky compared to millions of Falun Gong practitioners who were jailed, tortured, or killed in the past 22 years, and this persecution continues to this day. I hope my story can give you a glimpse at the evilness of communism and why we should stand against the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. Thank you. I will turn it back to the government.
Thank you, Jinghong. So, once again, as the CCP observes the 100th anniversary next month of communism in China, we want to remember the victims of communism, and that is why I am signing this proclamation to remember the stories that we heard here today and the millions of other stories of people in the past and people to this day that have suffered under communism and socialism. So please help me recognize again our folks, and why don't you come on up here real quick and I'll present this proclamation to you, since you were the ones that were telling your stories about how it was your families that suffered under communism. Should we actually move the podium here? We'll take one more picture without the podium in the way. Yeah, sure, we can do that. All right. Thank you all very much. Appreciate you being here.